Hi guys, this is Gloria Exum here with the Nashville Real Estate Show, and I have a special guest with me today, Tonya Esquibel. She's the Regional Vice President of Summit Funding. Welcome, Tonya.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm really excited to have Tonya here today so that we can talk about the changes that went in effect back in October in 2015 that have certainly been affecting our buyers as they are getting their loans.
Absolutely. One, I do think that the changes in October are a positive change for the consumer. It gives them protection. I mean, how many times has your client been to the closing table and didn't even have their final numbers? So they didn't even know what they were bringing to closing most of the time. So this allows them to be able to get those numbers 3 days in advance. But what that does, in addition to the timeline, because now there's a longer period to wait to get that, and they have to have it by law 3 days in advance. We truly recommend, as everyone's learning this new change in our industry, it's new forms, new software, is really to prepare yourself for a 45-day close minimum. 45 to 60 day isn't unrealistic. There's nothing more stressful than people going through the financing and the anxieties of buying a home. But once they feel like they're in jeopardy of missing that closing date, and is the seller going to extend my contract and give me that extra time, that creates some unnecessary stress. So if you just prepare and you plan on the front end and do exactly what your lender asks you to do, get everything to them as soon as possible, you could realistically get done in 45 days. But I think it's best just to prepare that and be conservative with that timeline with those changes.
That's really good advice. And for those of you that are out there watching from the real estate side of things, we at the Lippman Group Sotheby International Realty have really worked hard to make sure our clients understand how those timelines are going to work and making sure that we've allowed enough time in the contract so that there is less anxiety or uncertainty as to what the process is going to look like, and also making sure that they're following those timelines with their lender.
Yeah, absolutely. For the first time, I've been in Tennessee since '97, and this is the first, 2015 was the first year. Normally, if you need an extension, sellers are very gracious in giving a few extra days or a week. But because the market is in such demand and there's such a shortage of inventory, what we've seen is sellers just don't extend the way that they used to, because they might have a backup offer that's higher than the offer that they have on the table. So that's why it's so important to make sure you're working with a real estate agent like you and your team that's going to direct you and make sure that they're setting you up for success with timelines and not failure.
That's a really good point, that some of the sellers out there are not extending their time frames. Again, if we are working with a client and they really need to get into the home sooner than later, we're still educating them and encouraging them to go ahead and put those longer timelines in there to prevent that.
Absolutely.
But let's touch a little bit on the advantage to the consumer, these changes that went in effect and how they protect the consumer. I mean, they really went into effect so that the consumer would not feel rushed to make a decision. They would have time to do their shopping. But isn't it so important that they go ahead and make a decision of who they're going to use and make that commitment so we can actually get a true pre-approval?
Absolutely. So some of the changes does mean on the front end that you're accepting to move forward with the loan process. And once you have a waiting period for that. And then once you do get through the process, before, as a lender, we would estimate when we'd get a contract what we thought the third-party fees would be and what does that mean. Did the community have homeowners association? Was there inspections? Was there repair costs? Those used to never be on what's called our HUD 1 settlement statement. So now we actually have to call it contract to get the exact fees so there's not a big tolerance there, which that helps the consumer again, because in some of our communities, if you have a homeowners association due that has working capital and things like that, that could add an extra $400 to $600 to someone's cost that they find out at the end of the game versus at the very beginning. So that takes a little bit of extra time, but gives them more of a solid cost estimate. It's called a loan estimate now. And then once they get out of underwriting, that's where we have what's called a closing disclosure, and that has their final numbers on it. And they have to have that finalized 3 business days before their close date. So they've really got some time to look at that, and if there's any questions that come up, it gives them more time than traditionally they're sitting at the table a little bit with some uncertainty. So I do think it protects the consumer in that aspect, and it's a good change. I think that sometimes we got into, especially in our market, closing really quickly in 2 to 3 weeks, and that's just a lot of anxiety and a lot of time, and people felt rushed a little bit. So I think by getting their numbers early in advance and having more accurate numbers on the front end, it'll give them a little bit more confidence through the process.
So that definitely is going to make a difference if you haven't bought a home in a while. If you look back at the process from before, understanding now that there's going to be these certain timelines, the 3 days prior to closing and some of the disclosure dates, we just want to make sure that you're aware that those extra dates have been built in to give you peace of mind, provide the information in a timely manner, and give you time to look over it, make sure that everybody's comfortable before moving forward. I think it's a great change.
Yeah, a lot of people don't understand that when they're going through a mortgage process, we're working with about 15 different parties, and we're depending on them to get us everything they need by their timeline. And so if an appraiser's delayed a few days, or the title work's delayed, or the consumer takes a couple of days to get the paperwork, it can push that timeline. So, when I was in the business, the quickest I ever closed a loan was in 1 day. It's just impossible in today's lending environment to do it. And that's why I say whether it's your first home, your fifth home, or your 10th home, you need to sit down with your mortgage consultant face to face and understand, because there's a lot of things you might not realize that could jeopardize your approval or even getting closed on the loan on time if you're not consulted with those items on the front end.
Now, Tonya, one of the things I like about working with you is that I can have my client call you and you can get the ball rolling over the phone.
Absolutely.
Make an introduction, talk to them a little bit about what to expect, and then you're going to set that initial appointment to meet them face to face. Either you would be meeting them or one of your team members would be meeting them. So I really, again, like the fact that we can get them started with just a simple phone call. Just really takes a lot of the uncertainty out of it for the consumer.
Yeah, it's literally 10 to 15 minutes to do a phone consultation over the phone. We send a list of documents and a pre-appointment packet and get you in the office within 24 to 48 hours, and that's where we sit down and go through everything.
Well, I look forward to doing a lot of loans with you this year. I know you do a great job, and thanks again for joining us on the Nashville Real Estate Show. And if you have any questions about qualifying for a loan or any of the new timelines or any of the new programs, you can feel free to reach Tonya Esquibel at Summit Funding. And as always, at the Lippman Group Sotheby's International Realty, we're looking forward to helping you with your future home purchase or selling your home. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you.